to Leader's Edge,
where
learning is a never-ending
journey, limitless vistas. Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Leader's Edge. Today marks Season 9, Episode 3, with none other than Jan-Ace Mendoza, who is going to talk about cultural adaptation. Now, as you know, it's not just missionaries or even diplomats or businessmen who need to learn how to adapt to the ever-changing cultures of other countries. And it is a good idea to adapt first before moving to an assignment. So here to tell us about his experiences is none other than an old friend, a fellow Toastmaster, Mr. Jan-Ace Mendoza. Jan-Ace, could you continue your introduction?
Thank you very much for the short intro. So, good afternoon or good evening, everyone, whatever time you're watching this episode. I'm Jan-Ace Mendoza. I am a public policy practitioner that is currently working for a member of the Philippine Congress. I serve as the OIC of his legislative team. And that means I take the lead in terms of ensuring that our legislative agenda is in order. This involves writing bills, doing research, and also a lobby on behalf of the congressman so that we ensure that our measures are approved on time. Prior to this, I was working for a nonprofit that was focused on good governance in local government units. I was there for 5 years. And academically, I graduated from De La Salle University with a bachelor's degree in development studies and a master's degree in public policy from the National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies, or GRIPS, in Tokyo. I think that's it's about a basic introduction of who I am.
We share something in common as well. We belong to a Toastmasters club called Tambuli. But like all of our interviews, it's best to begin at the beginning. So let me ask a question, Janice. When did you know that serving abroad or serving the government was something that you wanted to do as a career?
I think this started when I had an inkling of wanting to serve in some capacity when I was in high school. I was always interested in history and topics of politics. But at the time, I wasn't really sure how would that materialize. I knew that I wanted to be able to serve in some way, but I didn't really know how that would look like personally. And I think it was only until I got to university when I got a better idea of what I wanted to do. When I was searching for my undergraduate course, I stumbled upon this course called Development Studies, which eventually became the major that I graduated in. And it's a very relatively new major. Not a lot of people know what it is, but in a nutshell, we discuss and learn about how countries develop and what we can do to help them develop. And when I saw that course, I saw what kind of career I wanted to do. I wanted to work in what we call the development sector, which really are any kind of job that would entail serving the country and contributing to the development of the country, whether that be in an NGO, whether that be in a government organization. So I worked towards that as an undergraduate to really get the skills necessary for me to be able to become a talented is not the right word, a well-capacitated individual that would be able to substantially contribute to the development of our country. And from there, when I graduated, I started looking for jobs, and I eventually ended up in a nonprofit that was working towards making much more responsive local government units. And that's where I found myself really being in public service, working with or working in the government. And that's how I ended up where I am now, basically.
In other words, the desire to make a difference or to feel like you're contributing to nation building is something that attracted you from that early time of your life.
Yes, I think it goes back to the things that I was exposed to when I was a child. I used to watch there's a TV series in ABS-CBN called Bayani, and they used
Mm.
to always feature national heroes. And as a young man, that made a very strong impression on me. At the same time, I like reading a lot of comic books, reading about superheroes. So there was, I don't know, it sounds cliche, but I wanted to be some kind of hero. So public service was the closest thing to that eventually when I grew up.
Mm. That's true, and for a lot of people, sometimes it's the influence of family, like maybe in their family, their grandfather served during the Second World War, or the dad served as a public servant, spent his entire career. Did you fall into that particular vein as well? Like, was somebody in your family? Uh, Serving in that capacity, or are you like the pioneer of the Mendoza clan?
No, I'm actually the pioneer. So I'm the
Cool.
only one working in uh, government right now, at least within our nuclear family.
Mm.
Within our clan, I think we have some people working in the government, but they were not the ones that influenced me. So at least within the immediate family, I'm the pioneer.
An obvious question, especially from our viewers, would be how did your family react to your decision to enter public service? Was it with their full support, or was it initially with some hesitation until they finally bought into it? Did it require you to sort of like sell the idea to them?
They were always supportive, and that's something that I'm able to appreciate about my family. Ever since I was a kid, my parents just allowed me to explore things freely, and never really dictated to me what career path I should take, what interest I should be engaged in, and I'm appreciative of that. So there was full support when I entered this career path.
That's a wonderful thing to hear because oftentimes you would hear stories about family members discouraging their children from doing this or doing that. I know because when I chose the degree that I did, everyone said, well, artists starve. So you may as well go into advertising if you want a degree in fine arts. And so go figure, I ended up in training. So uh, we may have our talents, but in the end, we pursue our gifts. And I can see that your gift is in communications, your ability to translate good ideas into words and ideas that people can understand. Would you say then that your your ability to serve now is influenced by your gift for communicating?
I would definitely say so. I think, yeah, even before I was in Toastmasters, people already said that I had a talent for speaking. I don't know if it was because I spoke well or because I always had the booming voice. And that was something that people always pointed out, that my voice was very commanding and it was something that really grabbed the attention of people in the room. So I wanted to take advantage of that. And I think with all of my professional career so far, I realized that not everybody really can speak well, and that's the reason why organizations like Toastmasters exist. And the fact that by God's grace, I've had some level of competence in terms of public speaking, it has helped me a lot in terms of relating to different stakeholders that we deal with, and really even just the simple things as engaging with my boss and trying to be a much more influential individual in the organizations that I've worked with. So public speaking really and really communication has been a big part of my success as a professional.
I can't help but agree with you. There was a time when I did several batches of presentation skills for the House of Representatives, and I was in awe of the profile of my participants. Some of them with two doctorate degrees, uh, others with the MBAs and multi-degree holders. And in the classroom, they participated actively and they were utterly brilliant. So I now realize that the wind beneath the wings of our gentlemen in Congress are really the people below, the team that helped them craft the laws that they vote on. Because without them, those laws cannot be written as well as they are. So I know that the country owes individuals like you a great debt of gratitude. Uh, but my question is, how did you have this opportunity to go to Japan? Uh, as part of your Was that as part of your duties in the House of Representatives, or was that a different uh, activity totally, like like a scholarship? How did that happen?
It was one of my long-time dreams actually to be able to take take graduate studies in Japan. So when I graduated from college, I took steps to really work towards getting to that point. And I I didn't get there immediately. There was, I think, I had twice or thrice I tried to apply even before I was in Congress to get to a graduate school in Japan. And then eventually, when I got to Congress, that became a stepping stone for me to get the scholarship that I wanted. So it's entirely an individual initiative from my end. And I just asked help from my boss because I needed to get the support of my boss to get the scholarship. So it was a personal dream to be able to study in Japan. It was a scholarship. It was not work related, although I needed to be in the government to get the scholarship that I got. And I got it eventually. And then I was able to get my degree in Tokyo.
Mm. I can understand how that can happen. I have an uncle, for instance, who's a chemist. He's a teacher in UP, who managed to get a Fulbright scholarship to study molecular biology in Texas. That was because of his being a professor, and they wanted him to earn a different degree so that he could bring back what he learned and teach it on campus as well. So, in that sense, a symbiosis occurs between our dreams and the organizations we work with. Now, I'm coming to a really important question, Janice. Did you have to prepare yourself in terms of mindset, because the culture of the Philippines and the culture of Japan are in many ways worlds apart? Was there some kind of preparation in terms of mindset that you had to do before you finally went?
Definitely. It was something that I would say that if you know me, if you've been if you've been a friend or an acquaintance of mine for a long time, I'm someone that has always been interested in Japanese culture. And I think that if I didn't have that kind of familiarity and that kind of immersion in Japanese culture, I probably wouldn't have been able to blend in as much and to adjust as well when I eventually started living in Tokyo. I didn't have trouble actually adjusting to Tokyo. Tokyo felt like home. But it was only because before I got my scholarship, I was going to Tokyo almost every year. And I was somebody who was really interested in Japanese culture. And that made it easier for me to be able to adapt. Because you're right, the culture is very different. There are similarities because we're both Asian cultures. But when I was there, I realized how different the Filipino culture was to the Japanese culture.
Yeah, that's true. One of the things that has always impressed me about the Japanese, and I wonder how you feel about this, is how they can live very compartmentalized lives. You know, work is work, and then fun is fun. But they very seldom mix the two together. Uh, did that did that throw you off, or was that something that sort of resonated within you? That sort of compartmentalization.
I think for my experience, that's true. The compartmentalization, you can see that especially in professional workspaces in Japan. It wasn't so much our experience because we were in a university that was largely international. We were living in a community that was largely international, and most of my classmates were from outside Japan. So we didn't experience that side of the culture in Japan. I've seen that only with friends that I know that live in Japan. But personally, I didn't. I wouldn't have wanted to deal with something like that personally, because I would say that it's something that is good, something you can admire from the Japanese, but also something that has been detrimental to their growth as a country, in the sense that there's I forgot the Japanese word for it, but there's a Japanese word for being overworked, and that kind of work culture, and that's part, that compartmentalization is part of that. I think has been something that has bogged them down. So
Mm.
I didn't have to deal with it, thankfully, when I was in Japan.
That raises a side question, of course, because it's almost like a stereotype to hear people say that Japanese men or salaried men work very hard to let their wives play golf and spend their money. Uh, did you find that to be true, or is that just a joke that people share when they talk about Japan?
I would say that I would describe it differently.
Okay.
What I would describe it as, actually, it's true that most of the salarymen bear the brunt of the working duties, but it's really to the detriment of the wives, because a lot there, one of the big problems right now, I think most people are aware of the demographic decline in Japan. And a big part of that really is because it's very difficult to raise a family, especially if you're female. In traditional professional spheres in Japan, like politics and business, it's very difficult for females to be able to break the glass ceiling. And so some of them, now that the world has become a bit more progressive, they're made to choose whether they want to get a career or stay at home. And a lot of them are now really trying to not prioritizing getting a family. So they would rather get their careers, because many of them have been denied of that opportunity for a long time. Because it's true, when you choose your family, a lot of them will just be stay-at-home moms, which is not wrong in itself. But a lot of females want to get much more career advancement, and that's part of the reason why there's a demographic decline in Japan, and studies will show that.
You know, you have been to Japan many times in the past before you finally went there on scholarship. So how many years cumulatively would you characterize your being in Japan if you accumulate all of it together?
Well, I first went to Japan in 2011. That was the first time I went to Tokyo. And then I went back in 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018. And it was only in 2019 I did go. I think it's probably like I've been there at least yearly for 5 years, and then the continuous year that I spent from 2020 to 2021. So
Hmm.
around five. That's quite a while.
So in other words, Jan-Ace, you're very well acquainted with the Japanese culture and its people. I want you to be able to comment on, for example, the incredible contrast that exists in their culture. I'm well aware that there is a part of their culture that can be very conservative. For example, people who are master craftsmen who make those katanas will spend literally years and years and years to master their craft. And yet, while that may look so serious, there's also a part of them that can have fun, things with things like Takeshi's Castle. I don't know if that's still a thing. And some of the things that they do are so much fun to watch and behold. Would you say that the country is filled with contrasts?
Yes, that's very much an accurate statement. The country is a country of contradictions, and not just in that area. So you've seen how they can be very serious and they have that comic side, which is it's really true. I think in the entertainment sphere, there's a lot. It's probably an outlet for them to be a bit more loose. So that's one area of contrast. But at the same time, it's also seen in other aspects of Japanese society. For example, Japan is one of the most technologically advanced countries in the world. We've seen them be so innovative in so many areas, but it's also a very backwards country in terms of technology. What very recently, the Tokyo metropolitan government only recently retired the use of floppy disks, for example, in the city hall. So that's an example. And um, fax machines are still a thing in Japan. Fax machines are still a thing in Japan. Another thing, CDs are still a very big market in Japan. So they have their fondness for these hardware. And why is it the case? Generally, the Japanese are very inflexible. It's difficult for them to be able to adjust from established ways. And I think that's part of the that contradiction is part of that, really, like the contradiction in terms of the technological advancement. And in many other ways, I could go on and go on and talk about it. But yeah.
That's true, because even if you isolate, for example, just one aspect of their culture, like for example their car culture, you would have people who like to meticulously look after old models and really keep it fresh. And then you have a culture, a subculture within that culture, where you have Japanese who modify their cars really way out there. And while the ladies can wear kimonos when they go out and be very formal, especially when they have their wedding pictures taken at the parks or near shrines, you can also see ladies with strangely colored hair and cosplay. They're fond of cosplay. So um, would it be fair to say that while you were there, no matter how many times you went back, you were never really bored?
Yeah, I was never bored. Uh, I it's my second home, really. Tokyo is my second home, and there's always something new to see. I mean, like you can go to a very traditional area like Kyoto, for example, outside of Tokyo, and then you can go to a place like Shibuya or Harajuku, where you see the
Mm,
people wearing the same kinds of outfits that you mentioned. So
yeah.
that's something very quirky about Japan.
Mm. On a side note, just to help you recount something that amuses so many travelers there, how did you first react to their unique toilets? I mean, those things are so technologically advanced that uh, probably a first-time traveler would be bewildered, how to use all those buttons and controls. What
Uh,
was your encounter with it like?
it was both bewilderment and amazement when I first, because the first time I went Japan 2011, that was February, so it was the height of winter, so it was very cold. And when I first encountered the that kind of toilet, it was very convenient because when I sat on it, it was heated, which is something that you don't normally
Wow.
see. It was a heated toilet, which if you don't live there, it's really something like a big novelty. But of course, then you eventually see the buttons on the side, and then you're not really sure how to operate it because it's all in the kanji, the Chinese Japanese script. So if you don't know how to speak Japanese, you probably be lost like looking at like it's normally on the side. So it was both amazement and then bewilderment at how it looked like.
Yeah, I remember that when I stopped by there on my way to the US, so my flight stopped there for a while, and so I had this unique opportunity to wander for a while within the airport area anyway. And I saw this map of their subway system, which really reminded me more of spaghetti than anything else. And yet one wishes that we had something that efficient in our own country. Are there things in Japan that you wish we would adopt in the Philippines?
Of course, the transport system, as you mentioned, is something
Yeah.
that I really miss from Japan. Uh, I don't have any fear of being late
Yeah.
when I when I take the train. Very efficient, and then the train line where I live was the newest train line in Tokyo, and it had Wi-Fi. It didn't have a driver. It was a driverless train. It was very new,
Wow.
and so it was very convenient. But pretty expensive, but if you have a commuter pass, it wasn't a problem. So that's one thing that I miss. Another thing that I wish we could adapt, and it is something that we actually worked on in Congress, is universal healthcare. There's a universal health insurance in Japan, and in Japan, the universal healthcare system, everybody's enrolled in it, and then you have to pay a premium monthly, and then all of the services are 70% off. So if you buy medicines or you buy medical services or avail of medical services, you only pay 30% of the total medical fee. So that's the general insurance health insurance scheme there. And I was going to the clinic there regularly because when I was in Japan, I before I left for Japan, I was dealing with high blood pressure because of the
Mm.
pandemic. So I was going to the clinic there regularly. So I was able to see how different it was. There was a clinic 5 minutes away from where I live, and my experience here in the Philippines was that you normally expect to wait like an hour, 30 minutes before
Yeah.
you get entertained. But there, I'm done in 30 minutes, like everything, payment,
Wow.
going consistently. It's as if they don't want me to stay there long. And then the clinic also sold the medicines that I so it had its own pharmacy. So it wasn't difficult for me to be able to get checkup and then serve. So I never stayed there anything beyond 30 minutes, including my travel time going to the clinic. So
And
those two things are the things that I miss the most, like the transport system and the health
healthcare.
insurance medical system. That area.
Mm. So it's true that supervisors at the Shinkansen line, the Japanese high-speed railway, have those tiny booklets that they're obliged to give you a sheet of if you're even just 1 minute late because of a train arriving late, so that you could prove to your boss that it wasn't my fault. The train was late, so just for 1 minute, they give you something to prove that it's not your fault.
I didn't experience that. So because I never rode a late train actually. So but they do apologize. I know they do apologize over the intercom. So but that's actually a good sign. I never experienced riding a train late.
Yeah.
It's always on the dot. If they would say that it will arrive at 3:23, it will arrive at 3:23. So it's
Wow.
amazing.
I'm curious though, because media being the way it is, they sometimes will show that white gloved foremen, I guess, or how would you call them, would push people inside bullet trains to make sure that they all fit. Uh, does that actually happen, or is that just media?
It doesn't happen in the bullet train because the bullet
Mm.
train is by reservation. So that wouldn't
Oh.
happen in the bullet train. It
Mm.
happens. I didn't have it personally experience it, but it happens during rush hours on the regular commuter lines. But I haven't seen it personally, but it does happen because I know that the rush hour can get pretty bad. I didn't take classes that were scheduled during the rush hour, so fortunately I didn't see it, but
Oh,
it does happen.
yeah, that was a good strategy on your part then. Part of me wishes that that sort of system could be brought here to the Philippines because our own MRT and LRT, it's really more like an experience of being a Spartan. When those doors open, ahoo, 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 and then they push their way their way in, and they're like sardines. Say goodbye to social distancing. Uh, a question I'd like to ask of you, because I noticed this, and it's particularly true of the Japanese, even before the pandemic. They're so fond of wearing masks. Could you help our viewers understand why is it that even before COVID-19, a lot of them wear masks?
I actually forgot when it started, but
Mm,
they're fond of wearing masks because I think I need to verify this, but I know that normally during flu season they have the habit of wearing masks.
mm,
So it's something that they it accumulated over time. Some of them wear masks for fashion purposes, but generally I think it was because of flu season when people. So it was not difficult for them to adjust like wearing. I need to verify that, but I think that that's generally the case because you see that also in other East Asian countries, not just in Japan. But I think I've seen people wear that in Hong Kong also. I'm not sure,
mm.
but it's something they're used to.
So, in other words, the mindset of the average Japanese is that the wearing of the mask is not a burden at all, but a desire on their part to prevent other people from getting infected with whatever they may have.
Yes, and to protect themselves when it's
Mm.
probably flu season. So
Yeah,
that's
because as you and I have probably observed in other countries such as the US, people have made such a big deal out of wearing the mask.
yeah, it's a very strange. If you lived in Japan, it's a very strange phenomenon because like when I was there during the height of the pandemic, and it's taboo to not wear a mask. I mean, not everybody. You'd see like one or two people not wearing their mask or not wearing it properly, but generally speaking, nobody was really complaining about
Yeah,
wearing the
yeah.
mask.
In other words, the whole country has part of their psyche that they obey, they follow rules, and they would not want to be the one to rock the boat. Would you say that that's part of the national mindset to to comply, to not be the one that goes against the grain?
Yes, that's actually and it would be you could see it in a lot of scholarly works that the Japanese have a very collectivist mindset. Not that there are there's no sense of individualism in Japan, but there's a very big sense of I wouldn't say conformity, but really trying to be homogeneous to the extent possible. And you see this in very different facets of life, even in government,
Mm.
where there's a very big emphasis on consensus decision making, which is both a good thing and a bad thing for the country.
Yeah, I can understand that because a consensus form of decision making ensures that everybody buys into the eventual decision that will be made. So you minimize ruffled feathers, and it makes for better harmony among stakeholders. But as you said, there's also the nasty side to that because it discourages agility, it discourages efficient action. um, Janice, having been there so many times, what are the things that make you go back over and over again? And I'm not even going to touch on the topic of food because I'm sure that's one of the biggest draws for you. uh, beyond food, for example, and how clean the environment is. Because in all of the videos I've ever seen of Japan, Japan TV, Fun Runner, Toshi, uh, I have yet to see an errant candy wrapper on the streets anywhere. Uh, so my question to you is, what makes you find Japan so charming, so desirable a place to visit?
There's always so much to see.
Mm.
I failed to mention that, and most of the times that I went back to Japan, I would always go back to Tokyo. It's my favorite place in Japan. And then I'm a guy that loves cities. I really love cities. And I would say that Tokyo is a city that has so much character. And every time I go there, there's really so much you can discover. Uh, if I contrast that with, let's say, living here in Manila, I mean, I grew up in Manila, but I don't see that kind of character in our city. I think there's a lack of respect. I think for preserving cultural identity.
Mm.
And when you go to Tokyo, there's a very good mix of the past and then also the modern side of Japan. And then every time I
Mm.
go back, I try to see more of that, whether it be in the food, whether it be the experiences that I would see when or another cultural facet that I would discover when I go back to Japan. And it's
Mm.
generally just the feeling that I feel at home in Tokyo, which is
Yeah.
really literally my second home now because it's the only other place I've lived in.
Mm. I would say that you're more Japanese than Filipino now, because when I visit online clubs such as Tokyo ESS and Oval, and I interact with the Japanese Toastmasters from those clubs, if you sat beside them, I would swear that you're from there already because of that. Number one, the inherent humility among their members, among people from that country. So I'd like to take the discussion now to something a little bit more serious, something which I personally admire and wish we had here in our country: the unique sense of command responsibility. I mean, it doesn't matter if it was one of the lowliest people who was responsible for it, but whoever is in charge resigns out of embarrassment, because it happened during his watch. Is that something that in Japan is admired rather than, say, discouraged?
I'm not sure if it's admired, but it's the norm.
Mm.
Generally, the norm. I think it goes back to a culture that places so much emphasis on shame, not emphasis on shame, but on honor rather.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of and as I mentioned earlier, there's a focus on collectivism or being homogeneous, generally speaking, in Japanese society. So when you are in these professional spheres, let's say in politics or business, if you make a big mistake, it stands out. So instead of having further shaming yourself or further shaming your organization, people have no choice but to just let go.
Mm.
I'm not sure if it's honestly, personally, I'm not sure if it's something to be admired personally. I think, of course, it's a step above what we see in other countries, but I'm not sure if it's something that is a sign of Japanese political or organizational maturity. I'm not sure because they have their own faults as a culture, and especially in terms of their politics, also, that a lot of people would not see unless they live there.
Oh, okay. Still, that sense of accountability and ownership over fault is something that is admirable in their people, because it allows for other more capable people to step up and to serve. Uh, Now let's take this in a different direction. I want to explore how does Jan Ace chill or have fun when he's in Japan and he's not busy hitting the books. How do you relax when you're not busy?
Well, and a lot of my friends know this. I'm a big fan of anime. So
Okay.
I watch anime, I play video games. And there was this one place in Japan, in Tokyo rather, that I went to every week. It's called
Mm.
Akihabara, which is it's a place that's known for electronics and anime culture. And I had some friends there, my former high school classmates who lived in Tokyo also like anime fans. And we would go there pretty regularly. That's one of the things that I did to enjoy. I Second thing is eat a lot of food. um, so the food is amazing, and I would try to eat a nice meal every week. And the third thing is I wasn't able to mention this earlier, but our program, my classmates were mostly people from coming from other countries as well. And we during the year that we spent together in Japan, we went out pretty regularly. So sometimes I would go out with some of my friends from like one of the last times that I went out there. I went with my friends from the Czech Republic to go to a museum exhibit. So those things, those three main things are the things that I do to relax when I was in Japan.
Cool. How is the karaoke culture over there?
Oh, unfortunately, I wasn't able to experience it as much as I wanted because of COVID.
Oh,
The
okay.
karaoke bars were not allowed
Mm.
when I was there, so I wanted to uh, see more of the karaoke culture, um, but unfortunately, I wasn't able to see much more of it because I love singing. But
Mm.
unfortunately, because of COVID restrictions, we weren't able to experience it.
A question though is that if they're fond of singing, and I can tell that they are, um, does that sense of honor prevent them, for instance, from singing late into the night and possibly tormenting their next door neighbor? I mean, are they sensitive, for example, to what they're doing might affect people around them?
Well, they sing in karaoke bars. So
Oh, okay.
I don't think they sing at home, unlike here in the Philippines. So I don't think they sing at home. So
Yeah.
they sing in the karaoke bars. So that shouldn't be a problem.
Mm. Um, an aspect about Japan that I seem to notice is how spiritual they are. Almost every video and every location in Japan that I've seen and observed will have a shrine or two. How would you describe the spirituality of the typical Japanese?
Okay, this is just based from my observations. I'm not sure if this is academically backed, but from my perceptions, interacting with my Japanese classmates, for example, and their professors, it's largely cultural.
Mm,
They're not really spiritual per se. It's like temples, for example, are places that they visit to during occasions.
mm,
But I don't see them like praying or because the Japanese culture is steeped in spirituality, but I wouldn't say that the Japanese themselves are religious. So
mm,
it's something that they would go to the shrine, for example, during New Year's, during certain festivals, but is it an everyday part of their life? I don't think so, unless you're one of the older generations. But I think most of the contemporary Japanese person would not be so religious and spiritual.
mm. So at this point in your career, would you say that you are essentially satisfied with the progress that you're making, or is there like a yearning for things to move a little bit faster?
I would say that up until this point, I've gotten to where I wanted to be. The big question mark now is where do I go from here?
Yeah.
Because my my initial goal was to be able to work in an international organization, which is really one of the reasons why I took a graduate studies degree in Japan. But those opportunities are not emerging as I would want them to be. So there's a question mark in terms of where I want to be next, I think.
Mm.
Maybe I think the more likely outcome is I would be staying in public service. But is that where I initially wanted to be? Not really. But maybe that's where God wants me to be. I don't know. I don't know.
Uh,
I don't know right now.
that is a fair answer. Would you say that when people who serve with the congressman, are their tenures coterminous with the end of the what do you call this, the
Term.
work of a congressman? Does it end as well?
Yes, where if you're congressional staff, you're coterminous. So if your principal is politically not very strong, your career in Congress will probably not last very long.
Mm.
Some people, because of the nature of the coterminous nature of the work, it's not uncommon for congressional staff to seek a permanent position within the congressional secretariat because there is a big pool of secretariat employees inside Congress. That's a tenured position, so you cannot be taken out if you get inside. So some people, if they're tired of being congressional staff, they opt to go to, which has happened to one of my former office mates. She went to permanent staff.
So there is that particular option just in case somebody is looking at possibly the end of the service of their boss. Um, long term, long term. If you could choose a station within which to serve, like if you could go abroad, would it still be Japan, or would you pick a different country, another country? Is there any other country that is alluring to you?
I think if I would work abroad, it would really be Japan. It would really be
Okay.
Japan. If I would work abroad, but I think like the generally speaking, I want to stay here. I think because the need is here, and I think there's much more of the need for people like us to stay and contribute. But if I was given a choice, I would go to Japan. The life was good there.
Yeah,
Life was
yeah.
good in Tokyo.
And I'm assuming that you're so comfortable already with the language, both in written and spoken form, that you could pass for a native. Would that be a fair assessment?
Oh no, I my Japanese sucks. So I would be very frank. I can
Okay.
survive. I can survive. But now I'm taking Japanese lessons again here in the Philippines because I realized how much better my friends were in terms of Japanese. So I can survive, but there's still a lot more that I could. I need a lot more work in terms of my Japanese.
Oh, so while we're at it, where would you advise people to go to learn the Japanese language much faster and probably more effective?
Well, it's not an endorsement, but I take language classes at this place called the Nihongo Center Foundation. So it's one of the oldest Nihongo schools in the country, and it has a branch in Manila and Makati, but they also have an online option now. So you can. I'm taking the online option right now, so you can. I can attest to how it's a good program because they gear you towards the taking the Japanese language proficiency exam.
Mm.
That's it.
So, would you say that for somebody who's young and looking forward to career options in the future, that learning a language is really one of the biggest stepping stones to getting to where they want to go? Like, let me ask you, Jan-Ace, how many languages would you need to learn to more or less guarantee a spot pretty much anywhere you choose?
It depends on where you want to work. If you want to work in Japan, you really need to know Japanese. I think there are very little, very few job opportunities for you to get if you don't know how to speak Japanese. There's it's called the Japanese language proficiency test. There are levels to it, from 5 to 1, 1 being the highest, and you need at least like level 3. It's called N3 to qualify for even a part-time job in Japan. So if you want to go to Japan, you need that. If you want to work in an international organization, you would normally need to have, I think, 1 or 2 particular languages. Normally, the UN would encourage you to have like knowledge in French or Spanish. So those are the continental languages. So that's really if you want to work abroad, from what I know.
I see. Now, as a Filipino who's been to Japan many times, are there things Filipino that you feel might be helpful for Japan to adopt or be more like?
Hmm. That's a question I've never been asked before. Hmm. Hmm. I think they could be much more flexible. Uh, there is a certain level of adaptability to the Filipinos that you don't necessarily see in the Japanese. One of the things that is a drawback, I think, for example, in their government, is how slow the response is when it comes to new threats.
Mhm.
So I would use COVID as an example. COVID was a very difficult problem for them to deal with because there are no enabling systems and laws in place for them to deal with infectious diseases. And it took a long time for them to be able to pass new legislation for them to be able to respond to it because of the consensus making nature of Japanese society. And because the leadership, even the prime minister, is constrained by party consensus. In the Philippines, you have much more flexibility during disasters, although we don't have as much systems, we don't have as much resources in place to respond. I feel that we're probably much more adaptable to change things when needed. And I think that inflexibility of Japanese culture is both a strong point and the weak point that the Filipinos probably have an edge to them. So that's something that I can think of.
I see. But certainly not our sense of humor, because I think that even if the Japanese are a bit on the serious side, they also have a fun-loving side that
They do.
I've seen some of those ceremonies where the men all gather together and they're just in their undies or something, and then uh, I think it happens once a year or something like that. I forgot the exact name of it, but they have so much fun. And, and
They
so,
have a very slapstick kind of humor.
yeah,
Japanese.
true. However, on the serious side, given that, as you said, no, they do take a while to make decisions. But I noticed that when threats to their national sovereignty are on the table, uh, my perception is that they're somehow more agile about that because, for example, they value their relationship with Taiwan and the proximity of Japan to Taiwan is something that they take very seriously, and they seem to be moving pretty rapidly towards preparing for any contingencies.
I think that's a very interesting observation because you're right, Dito Dino. And development. That's actually a recent development. And we can credit former Prime Minister Abe Shinzo for that.
Yes.
Former Prime Minister Abe was in foreign policy terms, a very hawkish prime minister in terms of foreign policy. And a bit of background, he was this guy who comes from a more conservative wing of the ruling political party, which is called the Liberal Democratic Party, which is a conservative party in Japan that has ruled for most of the last 50 years. But within that party, there are competing forces, different strands of Japanese conservatism. And former Prime Minister Abe comes from a wing of the party called the New Conservatives. The New Conservatives were a wing in the party that were very nationalistic, and they wanted to basically restore Japan's old glory when it was a very strong superpower before World War II and during World War II, stopping short of becoming imperialistic, because of course so that's not possible today. So these guys, at the wing of former Prime Minister Abe, they have for years lobbied for reforms, an amendment to the Constitution, because in the Constitution, the Japanese are not allowed to have their own army. They're not allowed to have their own armed forces. And that's why when you see or you read about their armed forces, they refer to them as a self-defense force, because they're not allowed to actually do preemptive strikes. They're not allowed to send their forces. So they were only able to set up that self-defense force out of a lot of reinterpretations of the Constitution. And for years, Prime Minister Abe has tried to lobby for amendments to the Constitution, but because the Japanese people are not amenable to that, that wasn't successful. So his efforts have been more around trying to restore at least Japan's place. If he couldn't reform the Constitution, he wants to make a more relevant Japan for within the international order. So during his term, he really pushed for becoming an active player in terms of strengthening and making Japan a leader in terms of preserving the international order. So he made alliance with the goal of actually countering China. So he made a lot of alliances with India, strengthened the relationship with the United States, and then had this concept called the free and open Indo-Pacific, which is the region that's immediately there. And where does Taiwan fall into this? Taiwan is a country that, if it's encroached by the Chinese, they perceive that as a precedent for further interventionism from the Chinese within the region. So with that context of how former Prime Minister Abe placing Japan as a leader of trying to preserve the rules-based order within the side of the world, including its own sovereignty, they have become, since his time, much more proactive, especially with China's rising aggression, the disputed waters with China, and now the Russian attack on Ukraine. The public has also changed its perception. They're now much more amenable to more defense spending. So within that context, the Japanese have become much more protective, if that's the right word to say, and much more agile in terms of trying to protect their own sovereignty and try to monitor any efforts to disrupt the prevailing stability within the region.
Mm. You know, you're right about how they can have a mindset that allows them to adapt to certain realities or emerging realities. Because you can see that, for example, in one simple fact, uh, that their nation is the only one to have experienced the impact of nuclear devastation, and yet they are also one of the highest users of nuclear energy. You know, despite the fact that they live in the earthquake belt, the country benefits from nuclear energy, and therefore manages the cost of power and electricity way better than, say, other countries in the region. Um, I sometimes envy them that, because our electricity costs so much, And we almost had a plant that couldn't seem to get itself operational because everybody was scared about the fallout, about where it's built. And I almost want to say, please, before you start judging how safe it is, look at look at Japan and how much progress they've made because they did not run away. They embraced their fear and leveraged it into something that has benefited their country. Um, so, Janice, I have a final question for you because I can see that your heart has really been in public service and perhaps to grow within the context of helping helping others, helping the nation, helping the government or an NGO make a difference on this planet. What advice would you give a young man or a young lady who is thinking about how do I make my life mean something? Because you only live once after all. What advice would you give?
There's a lot of, I think one of the signs of the age is there's a lot of opportunities that sprout up in terms of the choices that we make, no? In terms of our consumer spending, in terms of the things that we engage in. And that includes really career options. And a lot of people, especially now, are looking for meaningful work. I think it's a sign of my generation and the succeeding generations that they're looking for things beyond just getting a paycheck.
Yeah.
And really, there is an opportunity for you to be able to do that, which isn't really in public service. If
Mm.
you are still undecided about where you want to go, public service is an opportunity for you to make a lasting difference in this country. It's easy for, and I know it's easy for a lot of people to get discouraged about the state of the country, which is true. It's not very ideal, especially as someone who lived in another country that's much more advanced than ours. But if anything, because I saw how Japan is and I saw how they were after World War II, as you mentioned, they were really devastated and how they were able to turn things around in a few decades' time. I'm inspired. I see an aspiration that we can look up. And I want us to be able to aspire for being at that stage also. And I would encourage young people to consider contributing to that aspiration, to have a more prosperous and stronger country for future generations.
So, Janice, I'd like to take you to another aspect of your stay in Japan, and that is to ask you what were some of the valuable things you learned from interacting with your international classmates? I'm sure not just the Japanese classmates, but other classmates from other countries. Could you share with us some of the highlights of those interactions?
I learned so much actually from interacting with my international classmates because they came from countries that I I wasn't familiar with or I didn't really know about the probably would I'm not sure if I would even get the chance to be able to visit their countries. So for example, I had classmates from Central Asia, so Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and and those were countries that I don't know if I'll ever get to visit. I told them that after a year in Japan, if I would be able to get to visit them if ever again. And then I also had classmates from Eastern Europe, from the Czech Republic, Poland, and Romania. And it was a very interesting experience interacting with them because it made me realize things within our culture that was very different from the rest of the world. And it also just gave me general knowledge of other cultures that I wasn't exposed to. One thing that, for example, I also got to interact with our neighbors in Southeast Asia. And in interacting with them, I realized how, for example, Americanized Philippine culture is. For example, I normally would view things related to politics and foreign policy with an influence of the United States. And the US wasn't even really part of their conversations in a lot of times. So that was a very interesting, concrete example of things that I learned from interacting with my classmates.
Mhm. So, in the midst of all of these bewildering accents, and uh, and I'm sure that if you were to give a speech in the Toastmasters, just to say, help us guess what country this accent comes from, that'd be a lot of fun. um,
Yeah.
just as a side note, um, is the movie with the title BORAT be an accurate reflection of Kazakhstan? I mean, it
Uh,
was a comedy, but there must have been some truth to it. I mean, do they really talk that way? Do they behave that way?
I've seen clips of it. I've never watched it.
Okay.
But the guy my classmate from Kazakhstan was very. He wasn't like that. It wasn't
Okay.
like that at all.
Yeah, because I don't think that the customs would ever let them bring in a chicken in the bag, for because of quarantine and all that. So I know that was just for cinematic effect.
Yeah.
There's no truth that you could bring in a pig or a chicken in your bag and then somehow get through the airport.
That's
Yeah.
crazy.
um, do you still remember some of their names? I'm sure trying to pronounce them correctly probably gave you pause the first few times you tried to do it.
Yes,
Do you still remember some of them?
yes, and we actually our group chat is still very active, and so we got close as a class. So our group chat is still, and then yeah, some of their names are long, not
Mm.
even just the Central Asians, but in generally other Asian countries they had long names. So they actually had English names or
Oh.
nicknames that would made it easier for us to be able to interact with it. But of course, I would make it a point to try to remember their names
Mm.
as they are, because I think that's the kind of respect that you should show to the other cultures.
Mm. Yeah, I imagine that those names wouldn't fit on a credit card because they have too many letters on them.
Some
So
of them had long names, yes.
yeah, if you've ever been to the Toastmasters Club at the ADB when it was still very active, you probably would have also experienced that same thing that you felt because when I visited that club years and years ago, I had trouble pronouncing the name of the founder of the ADB
Mm.
Toastmasters Club. That when the guard said, "Who are you seeing, sir?" So I just fished out the calling card and showed it him. I'm here to meet him. Of course, now years later, I can say it. I can actually pronounce it. It's Dr. Shri Skandaraja. But back then, I was so afraid of making a mistake that when I introduced him as the founder to give the welcome remarks to a club anniversary, I introduced him this way. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome somebody that all of you know and love so much in a special way. Let's all stand up and shout as one his name as we give him a standing ovation. Everybody, let's welcome Dr.
That's a creative way to.
I was just so scared of saying it the wrong way. So somewhere out there, somebody said it right. So yeah, of course, Vietnamese names are even more challenging to pronounce right. So, uh, did you get to enjoy the cuisine from those different countries? I mean, like some of them probably would have wanted to cook their own recipe so that it reminded them of home. And did you get to sample some of those?
Unfortunately, not from them. Oh, we did. We did actually. I got to try Indian food, but
Okay.
that was home cooked by our Indian classmates, but only the snacks.
Hmm.
Uh, but fortunately, the Tokyo is actually not a lot of people know this, but Tokyo is also beyond its Japanese food. It's also a city that is home to great international cuisine.
Oh.
So we got to try, since a lot of our classmates were either were Muslim and observed halal. halal religiously, and then we had our Indian couple classmates who were vegetarian. It was always we always had to pick our food carefully, and we always ended up either in a Middle Eastern restaurant or an Indian restaurant because those are the kinds of food that would fit in. That's the joke that we would say as a class. So we always end up in an Indian restaurant. So I got to try a lot of Indian food in Tokyo, and it was a revelation for me. I also got to try Malaysian food in Tokyo when our one time after class we it was during Ramadan, so one of our Malaysian classmates was observing Ramadan, and we're gonna break his fast and said, "Oh, do you want to come with me to a Malaysian restaurant?" So he got to eat Malaysian food, and then and other cuisines. So Thai food also was very good in Tokyo. There was a very good Mexican restaurant in Tokyo, but we didn't have a Mexican classmate. But just a snapshot of how like the whole country was the whole city was a food place for international cuisine.
No wonder you love Tokyo so much. Because as I'm beginning to see here, uh, sharing a meal with a person from another country, especially eating the kind of food that they normally eat, is one really nice way to bond with them, I suppose.
Yes, yes, yes. And we even had to. I became exposed to certain religious holidays that they had. So we had there was a religious festival, I think being celebrated by Indian classmates called Holi. It's a festival of lights, and we went to their apartment and we celebrated that, and then we ate the meal. So those were things that we I got to experience, and I probably wouldn't have been exposed to that if I didn't have that kind of melting pot of class in Tokyo. Yeah.
Yeah, and probably one of the things that you had to learn firsthand for the first time is, so like in Japan, you'd probably bow when you're introduced to somebody. And then when you meet an Indian national, you probably have to put your hands together and say namaste, right? Um, did you have to learn all sorts of greetings when you interacted with all these people, or was it as simple as shaking hands?
Yeah, actually, it was very casual. Not much adjustment, I think, in terms of like when you bow. That's normally like informal settings, for example, like if you meet like your professor or something. But even then, and then with my classmates, we just said hi, or we gave a hug to each other. So that was a normal greeting. Like eventually, like when we became close, they would greet each other with a hug. So not a lot of those. I think those kinds of greetings you would only see them in more formal settings.
Hmm. Just as a side question here, because I'm just curious, have you actually tried one of those tiny cubicle rooms that they rent
Oh, the capsule
near?
hotels.
Yeah.
No, because they're expensive actually. So I never
Oh,
tried
they
them.
are. Oh,
At least
okay.
in Tokyo, because you
Mm.
could get comparable rooms for the same price, so it's much more
Mm.
comfortable. So I never attempted to try any of the capsule hotels.
Yeah. I imagine you can't even stand up in one because the ceiling is so low.
I think you
So,
can. You can just sit up. You can just sit up,
oh,
but you can't stand up.
okay. So that is probably designed for the transient person. So he has just a place to sack out and then move on
Yes,
to his next
yes, yes, yes.
journey. Mm.
Normally, I think business travelers are not really staying there in the an overnight stay and just a
Yeah.
few hours.
Is it true that, for example, I watched this video about an anime artist who lived so far from the city that what he had taken to doing was staying in those small one room places that's near where the train stops are, and he'd only go home like once a week. But that's where he stayed because it was affordable, it was comfortable, and nobody really loses stuff in Japan. In other words, honesty is such a big deal. Uh, would that be an accurate description of, say, how people behave out there? Like if you left an attaché case or you dropped your wallet, somebody would ultimately pick it up and return it to you.
Yes, I actually not during my stay during my scholarship. I lost my passport.
Oh, my goodness.
I lost my passport. That was in 2016. I left
Okay.
it at the. I eventually found out that I left it at one of the ticket stations. So I just arrived in Tokyo, in Narita Airport. It wasn't really in Tokyo. But Narita is in a neighboring prefecture. So I was halfway from the train ride from Narita to Tokyo when I realized I didn't have my passport.
Oh my
So
God.
fortunately, the train wasn't a. I was an express train, so I could get off and then ride the opposite direction. So I went back to the airport, and then I couldn't find my passport anymore. Then I realized I was searching for it in the wrong place. And then when I went back to where I realized that I left it, it wasn't there anymore. So I tried asking the lost and found section. So eventually they gave it to me. It was placed in a neat Ziploc. So lo and behold, there was my passport.
So I guess you simply had to prove who you were by showing another valid ID, and then you were able to retrieve it.
Yes, but I didn't have another valid ID, so I just had to like negotiate with them that I was telling them that's my only ID. The passport is my only ID, and they
Well,
were
it's
kind enough to give it back to me.
okay. Well, what your picture there would have shown that it is indeed you.
It's me. Yeah, so that's true, Dito Dino. And then I would like I wouldn't in the restaurants I would just leave my phone on the desk if I would on the table if I would
Oh,
go to the and
oh, you mean
I
like
wouldn't be afraid. I
you
wouldn't be
mean
afraid
like
of it.
if you went to a buffet and then you left your phone so that you would mark this spot of this table, this is reserved for me. So you'd leave your phone there, you'd pick up food, and then when you came back, it's still there.
Yeah, it would get lost. It would get lost.
Wow. Wow,
So you shouldn't
that's
worry about
awesome.
it getting lost.
Is that true, say, of bicycles even? Because I know that bicycles are a big thing in Japan. Uh, so you'd
Yes.
ride those, yeah.
Um,
Anywhere you leave it.
it's yes, because it's actually a very frowned upon if you steal a bicycle. Like it's people don't like that. So you
Oh,
can just leave it
okay.
anywhere, yeah.
Mm.
Or
So
even the
the
umbrellas.
oh, okay. Hmm. One thing that I do notice, which is popular in Japan, but not anywhere else, is they have transparent umbrellas.
Oh
And I've
yeah,
always
yeah.
wondered why is it transparent? Because if your goal is to try to keep out the sun, that all that does is keep out the rain, but lets the sun through. Did you ever figure out, or did anybody ever explain why they like transparent umbrellas?
I actually don't know. I should research that. Because I like the transparent umbrellas during the rain because you can see the raindrops, so it looks nice. But I
Oh.
never, yeah, I never bothered that. I should find out. I should find out because the summer there is terrible.
Oh
The
yeah,
summer
yeah, I
there
can
is
imagine.
terrible.
Does it get really hot there?
It does. But I would say like my Japanese friends who've been to the Philippines say that it's worse here. But I
Yes,
don't know. Like I don't know. I no, it's worse there. They say it's worse there compared because they've been here during the summer, and then I'm not sure because I didn't have that experience. I would say they're equally bad.
mm.
I would say they're
Oh,
equally
okay.
bad.
Mm. Um, just out of curiosity, have you ever tried their Kobe beef?
Oh no, I wasn't able to try the Kobe beef. I wasn't able
Yeah.
to try the Kobe beef,
Mm. I
unfortunately.
rem I remember when Brooks was still alive and he was stationed in Japan as part of his service in the U.S. Navy. He said that the officers on the base would take him there and that it was an incredibly expensive experience, but well worth it because the cows or the beef are never allowed to touch the ground. They're kept on slings as they're growing, and they never touch the ground. Their legs never touch the ground, so that the muscles are soft and tender, so that when you put them in your mouth, it literally just melts. So almost like candy. And the a secret he told me was buy right after an earthquake, because when an earthquake occurs, and this somehow scares the cows as they're hanging from the ceilings, that their value goes down a little, because fear apparently makes their muscles tense up and makes it a little bit harder. So the time to go to enjoy Kobe beef would be when it's right after an earthquake. Then it'll be on sale.
Uh, well, I wasn't able to, unfortunately. But
Mm.
one thing that I try to really try to eat a lot of. So I'm a big fan of tonkatsu. So I ate a
Oh.
lot of. I tried a lot of like really really good tonkatsu restaurants in
Mm.
Tokyo.
Have you ever tried to visit some of their provinces like Okinawa, and to see for yourself how old people get, and they're still mobile, somehow still healthy?
No, unfortunately, didn't really go to the provinces. The only time I
Mm.
went out was I went to the Kansai area, which is Osaka, Kobe, and Kyoto. So that's the
Mm.
only time I went out, which is not really like a provincial area. It's like Cebu, what Cebu is to Manila.
Oh, okay.
So
Mhm.
that's the most I've gotten out. And so I oh no, I was able to go to the province, but not during this trip. I was able to go there during 2014. I went to this place called Ibaraki, and very different from the city. Very different from the city. There are no high rises, no trains. You can only go around like using a bike or a tricycle, a tricycle, a taxi, or and mostly the people there are old because like the young people are all in the city.
And yet, because of their concept of ikigai, where people find what they like to do and they do it well and they can get paid for it, and it benefits the community. You'll find 100-plus-year-old, what you call this, gardeners who trim bonsai trees for a living, still doing it after all those years. They work until they can't work anymore, because apparently it's the secret of their youth. Um, would you say that you have found your ikigai as a career public servant?
Yes, I have. Um, we and it's interesting that you mentioned Ikigai because like in my former job, uh, my boss also doubled as a mentor for us. And right now, even if we're no longer working in the same organization, we actually meet regularly, monthly with my former teammates and him, and we have what we call Ikigai Sessions, where we actually made a personal roadmap for ourselves, and we try to have a personal vision for ourselves, and we keep each other accountable in terms of like, oh, how's your progress in terms of your Ikigai plans or your Ikigai. So
Mm,
yeah, I have, and then I hope I can stick with it.
mm. And so I'm sure that you keep in touch with your classmates even up to now. And maybe if they're ever in Manila, uh, it'll be your joy to be able to treat them to Filipino cuisine.
Yes, and I promised some of them that I would visit their countries. And my number one on my list is going to Eastern Europe to see my classmates from the former USSR countries.
Oh, oh, okay. That would probably take you close to Ukraine.
Yeah,
About
but
the,
they're all, but these are NATO countries, so it wouldn't be a
okay.
problem.
All right, gotcha. In other words, very much safe. Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes.
So I guess you did learn a lot from your classmates, and you did learn a lot from the Japanese citizens themselves. Is there a phrase in Japanese that you've taken to heart, and what does it mean?
Hmm. No, no particular Japanese phrase, but there's a principle in Japanese principle that I actually learned from my former boss. That I think I've seen myself in Japan, which is what the 100/0 um, principle, which is you give 100% to your work and zero excuses.
Oh.
So that's and I've seen that in the Japanese, and that's something I take into heart.
Mm. In other words, the pursuit of excellence, nothing but the very best
Yes.
effort from us. Mm. I would therefore maybe summarize our episode by saying that as a young man, you found your niche in life early and was inspired by it. You followed your dream, uh, despite not having anyone in the family lean in that direction and serve as an inspiration for you. You are, after all, a self-determined person. In other words, you set your goals and you pursued them. So congratulations on that, because you are therefore an inspiration to so many people who live lives that may need some sort of true north, and you have found your true north. Um, so, on behalf of the Leaders Edge, we'd like to thank you for being our guest today. This is part of our new series because we're now interviewing not former district governors, not past international presidents. We're now starting to interview young people currently serving Toastmasters. So Raul de la Vega was one of them. You're one of you're only the second so far. So thank you once again. And I'd like to tell the viewers that coming up soon for season 9, episode 4, is another guest called JV Wong, who will be hosted by Dinah Loomis, and she will be talking about ignited by a purpose. Well, that certainly sounds like something that is going to sizzle. So I'd click on the like, share, and subscribe button so you can be updated and informed when it comes out. And as ever, ladies and gentlemen, learning is a never ending journey with limitless vistas. Good day.